Hello there. We're in Nuremberg again today, in Germany, southern Germany, Bavaria, in a square just outside the castle, the imperial castle, that the Nurembergs call the Kaiserberg. The square's called the Tiergartnertor Platz, very popular in the evenings, full of people. It's famous for having the Albert Dürer house. Dürer's a kind of etcher artist from the late 14s, early 15s. He's one of those artists that kind of beckon in the kind of modern times, if that makes sense, in the sense of before him, medieval, kind of flat and unrealistic, and with Dürer, suddenly things become real and observed, and he would have enjoyed an urban sketching role, I think. He's a proper sketching dude. But I'm actually here for an evening meal. I'm here at this Augustiner restaurant, which is a monk type of restaurant originally. And I'm sitting here because of this rather interesting view, seeing the Kaiserberg, the imperial castle in the background there, and these two rather interesting buildings, which we'll talk about. But what becomes interesting in this is that because of me eating a meal, it gets dark. And so we have a drawing which is kind of drawn at night for a large part of it, which is not something I'd normally do because it just seems like, well, you should be doing other things by the time it gets dark at night rather than urban sketching. But it was quite fun. I quite enjoyed it myself. So we're starting out with a piece of grey paper, and at the moment it's bright enough. We've ordered food, but it hasn't been delivered. So, I'm thinking, well, I've probably got enough time to do a really quick sketch because, I reckon I've got time. Of course I'm wrong, but I don't know that yet. But I am looking at this very, very complex view and trying to be accurate to it to some degree, but also super, super fast and kind of scribbly and sketchy. Now, when you're doing these kind of half-timbered buildings that you get in Bavaria, there's a temptation to want to be kind of architecturally accurate to them. The timbers are really detailed in how they support each other, so there's a sort of temptation to want to kind of really carefully respond, to their precise angles and where they move within the facade. And actually, it's not that important. There's going to be some you miss, so what's important is to get the energy of them, the main view of them. Now, we have an interesting moment here. I've taken a number of white pens with me because I wanted to basically try. It's one of those things you do as an urban sketcher. If you're using toned paper, you're going to use a lot of white. And so you end up continuously looking for a better white because white's tough, You need something that's opaque, that doesn't show the colour of the paper through it and stays wet and applies in a nice way and has a nice brush tip, of course. So I bought a couple you've seen me using here. I've used the Sharpie, and although I've used it in other drawings in this same session and it was fine, today at this moment, for whatever reason, it didn't want to play. I wasn't enjoying how it felt in the hand. And that often happens when you're sketching, where you get a pen where there's just something about the conditions. Maybe it's the paper, maybe it's just a bit tired, the ink's running low, maybe it's the temperature of the day, maybe it's just earlier in the day maybe you're pressing harder and now you don't want to press like that. So having a couple of choices, for me anyway, can be quite a nice way of breaking that sense of unhappiness with a pen. So I brought out an alternative pen, an All Bliss pen, and it's working very fluidly and very happily, so I'm very happy to sketch with it. And you'll see me using it as many people would use a black pen, basically to sketch all the major elements. Because at this point of the day, as I say, I'm thinking I can get this thing done in half an hour, and it's going to be a sort of happy boppy little sketch. You might have noticed that the Sharpie actually dribbled a bit. It spat out some stuff, which, I know, a long time ago would have probably been super annoying to me, but I didn't care because I knew I could take care of it. One of those things that's worth kind of being aware of from the point of view of an experienced sketcher. If you're using inks and dip pens and acrylic paints, acrylic inks, there's going to be slippage, there's going to be spillage, there's going to be a bit of a mess or a fingerprint or a smudge, and just roll with it. It's fine. It's part of the character. There was a report on a Van Gogh painting that I saw in the London press, how they'd done this super close analysis and found flies embedded in the paint, because Van Gogh would paint plein air, outside, all in one session, and obviously there's buzzies around, and some of the buzzies got caught in the oil paint, and they were analysing the fly itself, and it's kind of, I guess it's DNA. And I can imagine at the time, well, probably actually Van Gogh probably did get annoyed, but that an artist at the time could be annoyed by fly. But actually, historically, it's just interesting that when mistakes happen or when things happen, it's just interesting because reality, yes? So just roll with it.
It felt like a challenge.
Hey, though, not that I'm comparing myself to Van Gogh, yeah, that'd be crazy. Now, when I started this drawing, I was kind of thinking I would do the left-hand building, which is called the Pilatushaus, which is the craftsman's house. I think it was built originally by a guy who made armour, and I think it gets the colloquial name of the house of the armoured man. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Anyway, it's properly old. It dates back to the 1480s, 1489, I think. And it's survived pretty much intact for the entirety of that time. So, it's a proper old-timer, something to be respected. And I thought I could do it with a lot of kind of detail and colour and depth and just kind of haze in the right-hand side, just kind of give it something but not let it dominate. And increasingly, as I was sitting there, it wasn't so much about the house on the left or the castle in the background. It was about the relationship of the two buildings in the castle in the background, that kind of slot between them, that space between two iconic things, two beautiful things. So I kind of changed the direction of the drawing, gently, not in a way that was, weird, just in the way that made me feel as if, again, I have to basically give the same amount of love to the building on the left and the right so that they balance each other, even though my original intention was to give more love, more detail to the left. And the same, in a way, with the castle in the background. Originally, I thought, well, let's just ghost it in. Let's have it like a background blobs. But increasingly, as the light changed and the big spotlights came on, I was kind of thinking, oh God, that looks kind of cool. Let's give it some of that spirit and some of that quality. Which is really my way of saying I kind of overran. I kind of took more time than I had intended. But I should probably be honest with you here. By this point, I've had a big plate of smoked sausage and a glass of their local. And I'm thinking, well, let's not run away yet. Let's digest a little. Let's enjoy the pleasant sort of atmosphere. There was music playing. People were very happy. And even as the sun goes down and the light gets dark, I'm thinking, but I'm happy. And I don't know how the drawing will turn out, but, I think I'm being respectful to the site and to the experience of being there. And ultimately, of course, that's what an urban sketch is, that sense of response. Now you see I've reached for the Tombows, which for me are shadow pens. I only ever have grey Tombows, a couple of different tones of grey. And I'm at this moment trying to sort of punch in this sense of the darkness is coming over me. I can compensate with the exposure of the camera in this recording. So it doesn't for you look as dark as it was for me. But the buildings are well lit, so you can see what you're trying to draw, and you can see enough of your paper. So it's just a fun experience, really, I think, and it still carries on that sense of speed and immediacy. In fact, it's kind of the kind of thing where afterwards you think, why don't I do more drawings at night? Because it's probably good training somehow. It kind of makes you see things in a very simplified way. In fact, yeah, that's going to be the advice at the end of this drawing is going to be do a couple of night drawings, because there's something in the way that the world simplifies down at night into these sort of forms, simple forms, easy to recognize, highlighted. God, I'm going to tell you such a random story. When I was learning to drive as a very young man, all my lessons for learning to drive were at night. And I didn't think anything of it. It was just during the winter time, basically. And I had my 20 lessons and passed my driving tests. And every single time I drove, nighttime, until the actual test. And it was only afterwards I realised how brilliant that had been. Because at night, cars are very easy to identify. They have, not only do they have the lights on, but they're on the corners. So you can see where everything is. Bollards and signposts and traffic lights. So actually learning to drive at night, I think was a really clever idea that everybody should do. It makes it so much easier to kind of know what's important. Whereas now when you drive around, everything's distracting, everything's shouting at you. Everything's asking for your attention. Oh God, I sound like such an old man. Now you'll see the layering technique coming into play here. So obviously we've used the white pen, then we've gone in with the woodwork brown pen, and then we've gone in with kind of shadowing to create form, and then we're going in with this, which is a Tom Studio Lumos. It's actually not the duo, it's single nib one, but still. And it's loaded with fountain pen ink, rotring ink, which is waterproof, which I quite like the idea of the waterproof ink going over the top of the acrylic sort of paint below it. And there's something interesting that happens when you start layering. I mean, you'll see now I'm going to go into a fine Posca pen to bring out the white lines of the window fenestrations. And there's just something about lines on top of lines and sort of lines on top of blocks of colour that adds this visual complexity that feels very intentional. But at no point am I being careful. It's all sketchy and quick. I will say something about Posca pens while I'm here. By God, they take a lot of shaking, and I'm just not, I don't know, I'm just too lazy for that. And I find that I've never truly mixed the paint enough. And if there's one piece of advice, if you should only really use a Posca pen if you're happy to shake, because if you don't mix the paint up inside, it's very runny and very wet and not very opaque. So, you know, what I would consider more modern pens, like the Artex and the Just Art that I'm using here, acrylic paint pens, they just seem much easier for the urban sketcher when you're out in the field, you know, because I guess if you're in the studio and you can prepare your tools in advance and kind of do a bit of establishing, you know, shaking things up, maybe that's different. But I don't want to be standing, you know, in the street shaking pens. You end up feeling like a bit of an idiot, as if there's something wrong with them, you know. I always feel as if they're, I don't know, you're doing it wrong. Anyway, the sun is now properly down, and so it's time to reach for the blue ink. This is calligraphy ink, which I bought because it was really cheap. It's kind of dip pen ink, which you use if you were, dipping an ink pen in. It's waterproof. It's extremely interesting colour, very kind of royal, sort of has a purple hint to it. It's a liquid draw product, or liquid draw product, probably because it's only got one D in it. And I like it because of its cheapness. It makes me sound awful, but I like it because it's so kind of, you can just splash it all on, you know. You can just kind of work it in a really kind of fun and fluid way. It soaks up fast, it dries fast, and it's got a real potency to its colour. So it works great for sky, but also works great for shadow. And just kind of popping in where you feel as if it needs a bit more kind of zim-zam. So it's doing a kind of fun job. And at this point, to be honest with you, I'm just enjoying myself. We're just kind of making it look representative of the vibrancy of the evening. In fact, I wish, to be honest with you, I'd done even more of this, you know, even more poppy, even more loud. Now, at this point in the recording, in the footage, you can see that the camera is starting to struggle slightly with it's so dark that it can't really see enough, and we're getting a bit of pixelization. So anyway, I'm going to speed this bit up a bit, and speed it up quite a lot, in fact, just so you can still see the process, but, you know, I won't ask you to sit through a few minutes of slightly grainy looking footage. But you'll see that what we're really just doing is that dibby-dabby process that we sometimes talk about. They've turned the lights on, isn't that fantastic? I hope they didn't do that just for me. Anyway, that dibby-dabby process where you're really just kind of touching here, touching there, moving on, moving around in order to find that kind of extra layer of detail and enrichment and focus dragging. I should explain. So the eye goes to a certain point in the drawing that you choose, but sometimes you want the eye to kind of flicker. You want it to look at one thing and then another thing, like another thing. So you're dancing, or the eye is dancing across. So you'll often see that sense of adding little points of intensity to kind of boost. Like, for example, I'll add white on top of white to make that piece of white brighter than other pieces of white, just so it feels like it's kind of shining more, just to make sure the eye has something of the sort of complexity of the textural density of the imagery we're looking at. Okay, we've come to the end. I'm darkening everything down just because it's getting darker and darker, but I think we're done. So here's the final piece. There's my empty glass, there's the happy crowd, there's the lovely view. It was a fun evening. Makes me wonder why I haven't done more kind of late evening sketching. There's a pleasure to it. So the final piece, there's lots I've learned. There's bits I like, there's bits I don't like, there's bits I do differently, and that's as it should be. So well done everybody if you got to the end. Do a night drawing. Go on, yo, you want to.